This edition of MacVoices is brought to you by Transporter, the solution to your cloud storage needs. Get 10% off your transporter by visiting filetransporter.com/MV and use the coupon code MacVoices. Welcome to the MacJury on MacVoices. This is the talk of the Mac community. I'm Chuck Joyner. We've got a very distinguished panel this time, folks, as really as we always do. We never pick anyone undistinguished for the MacJury. Tonight's topic is software licensing, some of the recent moves by Adobe and Microsoft in particular. We're going to see if we think it's a good idea, whether it's for you, whether it's for us, and where we're headed in the future. Before we get to that, though, let's meet the panel. First up this time, I usually leave him until the end, but this time we're going to give him top billing, Mr. Jeff Gamet. Jeff, it's great to have you.
It's great to be here, and since I got top billing, what do you want, Chuck?
Just your presence and your wisdom, Jeff.
All right, I can live with that.
Okay,
and,
good.
I should probably plug myself a little, right?
Please.
All right. So for those that don't know me, I'm the managing editor for the Mac Observer. So go over and read some of our stuff, and then go find me on Twitter, because you'll feel better about your life after you read about mine. So I'm twitter.com/jgamet.
You know, I'm tempted to go somewhere with that, but I think I better just stop. Just go check his Twitter feed, folks. Next up, someone we haven't talked to for quite some time, and that's my fault and not his, Mike Rose from the unofficial Apple web vlog, or TUA. Mike, it's great to see you.
Good to be here, Chuck. Thanks for having me. And you know, I always love to be invited. I don't fault you for the frequency or infrequency of those invites. You fit me in where you can. I appreciate it.
So, what do you do for the people who may not know you? There are probably one or two out there is all. You know.
I'm one of the editors of the unofficial Apple weblog, which is AOL's Apple and Mac and iPhone-centric site, sister site to Engadget and TechCrunch and Joystick and all those other wonderful Weblogs Inc., legacy Weblogs Inc. sites. And I'm the host probably about 60% of the time of our weekly podcast, which is live on Sunday nights, where Jeff is a frequent guest, and Chuck, I believe you've been a guest from time to time as well. Yeah, that's what I do.
That's great. Well, I'm glad you're there to do that and here to do this.
Me too.
Last but absolutely not least, somebody has to be last, but they're never least. This time it's Mr. Mark Fuccio. Mark, it's great to see you. Thanks for coming.
Hi, Chuck. It's good to be here, and this should be an interesting panel. I have interesting other jury members. I've been on many of these deliberative MacJury shows before, and maybe your listeners know me by now. I've done a lot with startups, especially in the storage space, but doing some other interesting work and projects, and that gives me quite a different perspective, because in some ways I have not absolute license to go in and out of different companies and businesses, and get to see the good, the bad, and the ugly of what's going on out there.
Hopefully more good than bad and ugly.
Generally that's true, but the ugly is really ugly.
Yeah, well, no, I better leave that alone. Well, I just want to let you know, gentlemen, this is, I think, the second appearance for the gavel. So if we need it,
wow.
It's here.
It's impressive.
Well, but as I said the first time, unfortunately, Mike, I have a glass desk, so I have to be careful where
Okay. People who sit at glass desks shouldn't wield gavels, I think. Yeah. We've all learned something today.
And this is why I don't have a gavel.
Yeah.
I have a teddy bear, but no, never mind. We're not going to bring it in.
Yeah, right. Teddy bear? Okay.
Yeah, right here.
Guys, as I said at the outset, this is about software licensing. There's been quite a bit of discussion and a bit of emotion, too, I think, about Adobe's moves and Microsoft's moves to more of an online and or licensing model, where you either subscribe to a service and do most of your work there online, or you pay an annual license fee to download the programs, and then they are active for that year. I think Microsoft, I believe for Microsoft Office, is $100 a year, and we'll primarily focus here on the Mac side. but that's for the current and aging version of Office. And Adobe seems to be, I believe, about $50 a month for the current version of what we would have called, I guess, the Creative Suite, the current version of Creative Suite. So, Mike, how about if we start with you?
Yep.
Any reaction to these? Either one, both?
Well, in my other life outside of TUA, I work at a large enterprise, and it's not too surprising that that's the direction that these suites are going. I mean, Adobe's I think is maybe a little bit more possibly being a little bit more well received by the community, because the Creative Suite, in principle, if you buy it, or if you buy it every year or every 18 months, you're buying it because that's how you earn a living. Photoshop or Premiere or After Effects or Illustrator, those are part of your professional toolkit. So having a taximeter on that application suite is not quite so, it doesn't put people off quite as much, because that's, you're spending money to earn money. You're paying for the tool so that you can then go and do your job. I think for Office, for a couple reasons, it becomes a little bit more edgy or a little bit more irritating for consumers. One reason is this is something where I think a lot of consumers, both on the Windows and Mac side, are used to running versions of Office that are 1, 2, or 3 versions behind. They're not in the habit of upgrading every year. They're not in the habit of spending that $129 or $200 or however much. And usually, at least on the Windows side, they're only buying Office when they get a new PC. So this is a very different model for Microsoft for the consumer. It's a pretty good deal. You're able to put it on 5 machines. You can mix and match Mac and PC. Presumably someday it might include some sort of iPad service, which would be interesting. But it's also competing against things like Google Drive and Google Docs, which are free and provide a lot of the same functionality that people need, particularly for home users. It's not clear to me that Microsoft is making a great case for why you should be subscribing to Office when you might not need Office 2 years from now. You probably don't need Office every day.
Okay. Please remind me to come back to the 5 machines thing, because I want to comment on that. Jeff, I'm going to go to you next, because you are, in addition to being one of the honchos at the Mac Observer, you're a graphics guy too, and so I'm especially interested in seeing what you have to say about the Adobe model and its pricing and what you get for that price.
All right, first, both Adobe and Microsoft have been making it clear, if you knew where to look, for years, that they're going to the subscription model. And so I wasn't surprised when it finally happened. I was actually surprised it didn't happen last year for Adobe. The deal Adobe is making makes Creative Suite as a subscription service or subscription software package really compelling, because the pricing is much better for most people than if they went out and bought the full package. And they always have the most up-to-date software, and they get access to updated features before people that buy the traditional licensing model. And then they throw in some other services with some web storage, and you get not just Photoshop, InDesign, Illustrator, and Dreamweaver. You get everything that Adobe makes, except for InCopy, which I find to be absolutely fascinating that they don't include that in the package. So I think Adobe has done as good a job as they possibly can to make their software subscription service a compelling option for a lot of people. And I think it's really important in the graphic design world that you're running up-to-date software. Well, like right now we're on Creative Suite 6. If you're running Photoshop CS3 or 4 right now, in your workflow, you are way behind, and your competition is way ahead of you, and they will get the jobs that you can't do, and that's going to be a lot of them. From the Microsoft side, well, Microsoft has wanted to push everything to subscription, I think, for a long time. That was part of the idea behind .NET when they started working on that. And by the time it rolled out, they realized that they couldn't make it into what they wanted it to be, so they made it into what they could. And so now we're finally seeing the subscription idea come together for Microsoft. But I think they had to wait and see what Adobe was doing before they could figure out how they could best present their subscription service. And I don't think they're doing as good a job at making it something that looks compelling to their users.
Mark, you're the business guy, as you said. You have a chance to see inside a lot of organizations. And I'm really curious to see your comments more about Microsoft, but feel free to comment on the Adobe model too. And I'll just let you go there, and then I'll get into my own paranoid ramblings.
Okay, so I've heard both Mike and Jeff give a little bit, sort of a thumbs up to Adobe, and sort of moderate to thumbs down to Microsoft. I don't know if that's justified or not. I think the challenge that both companies are having is that they're mature companies, and their revenue growth has slowed down. If you look at Adobe over the past couple of years, I've got a spreadsheet here if you want exact numbers, but it's not great. It's on the order of 10%. And similarly for Microsoft. Interestingly, in Microsoft, if you peer into their business units, both the OS and also their business products, their revenues have been down, for each of the past 2 years. So I've lived through this sort of transition before in a different industry, and if everything is an up and growing market, you're focusing on sell, 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 sell. When things slow down, a shift in thinking occurs, which is, gee, not everyone upgrades all the time. How do we boost revenues? And that's why subscription comes in. Is basically they're thinking there's a lot of people out there on older versions. Let's find some sort of way through either an upgrade or hopefully an OS upgrade through one of our partners, so we're blameless. This provides a catalyst, to get to migrate people into a subscription-based revenue, which hopefully will deliver, more top-line growth and more profits.
Well, and to Mark's point, subscription revenue is a beautiful, beautiful thing, and a lot of really successful companies build their offering around subscriptions because it is revenue that just keeps coming, and the only way you lose it is if your customers churn, they go to a different offering, or they die, or they stop using the product. But as long as they stay with your platform, as long as they stay with your product, you're going to be making your $50 a month or your $99 a year. And that's what drove the magazine industry for many years. That's what drove AOL and CompuServe and other online subscription services. It's what's driving Google Apps and Hosted Exchange and a lot of the cloud services now, and Dropbox. Dropbox, as an example, is able to offer a free service to 80 or 90% of its users because it does have subscription revenue from those 10% to 15% that are willing to pay for the premium version of the service. So it's great. It's a great way to make money predictably in a business that isn't very predictable.
I think with Dropbox, I think there's a number of Forbes articles that that quote actually that they only have 3 or 4% of their customers are paying customers.
I was giving it.
You were there, So, but I mean that I think therein lies some of the challenge, overall with this the so-called freemium model. Give something away and try to harvest the people who pay. And the reality is, the Office tool suite very, very mature. I bet you, a lot of the Adobe tool suite is very mature. I've been in a couple of briefings where you have to sign NDA, and they'll just obliterate all trace of you and your family and your pets and everything if you whisper anything about it. But there, the big theme is these are the top 10 things that are new in this product or that product. So they've been focusing on trying to stimulate the the sale of the new. And if you look at the revenue growth, it's been hitting a plateau. So they're obviously trying a different business model. As is Microsoft. I think maybe the difference is that building on a point Jeff was making, that a lot of the creative tools are continuing to evolve in technology, whereas Office tools, I mean, there's already more functions in Excel and more formatting options with bugs in Word than most people use. So having more is just not creating any new value. And they went through this bullshit trick of, well, let's create this ribbon. Remember, what was that? Part of the lead up into Office 2010 or 2011 for Windows 7, and that everyone I know, they're just pulling their hair out. Even me pulling my hair out of just.
Yeah, don't do that, Mark.
Yeah. No, you don't even want to use that for the for the tool, right? Because you know how to use it, and all of a sudden they've made change for seemingly their own own purpose only, to try to force people to upgrade. Instead of fixing bugs, in formatting and tables and stuff that existed for 15 years, they've come in with this superficial patina of stuff to try to get people to buy. I think they've seen that hasn't worked. Again, just looking at their own results, they've seen their Office Suite revenue down each of the past 2 years. So they're clearly trying something new and something different.
And this is the thing that bugs me about the Microsoft, and we'll take them one at a time. Microsoft, is there anything that we've seen in the last iteration of Office for the Mac? And again, we'll leave Windows out of it because maybe some of you are qualified to comment on that. I can't. But has there been anything really that you needed to update it for, except some system level compatibilities? Have there been any significant new features that, frankly, I just don't remember?
I'll just speak to one of the applications that's that I spend a lot of time with, which is PowerPoint on the Mac, and that has seen significant feature updates. PowerPoint, I mean, Mac Office actually has a submarine feature that we don't talk about that often, which is feature for feature and element for element compatibility with the Windows version of Office. The most important feature of Mac Office is that it doesn't do strange stuff to your files that originate on the Windows side. And if it didn't do that, if it didn't have that file fidelity, it wouldn't be useful. We still have a minority of Mac users in the world. We still have to live in a Windows world. And the file compatibility of Mac Office to Windows Office is very, very important. In Office 2011, as it did in Office 2008, that story got better. And it continually gets better, but with Office 2011, it really got better. I mean, it was a major, major improvement on a lot of fronts. Word file fidelity got better. Excel got better. PowerPoint not only got better, PowerPoint actually pulled ahead of the Windows version in a couple key features. The layering feature, for one, made a huge leap. There's still things in terms of how PowerPoint on the Mac handles animation reordering and some different tools you can't get access to, that it displays correctly. It doesn't break the file anymore, which it used to, but you still can't edit the animations in exactly the same way you can on the Windows side. Where the Mac Office version sort of falls down on the job, unfortunately, is with Outlook. And I don't think there's anybody. And I love Outlook, and I have a warm feeling towards the people that work on it. I know those developers. I've talked to them. I think they're great people. They have a hard time. Outlook for the Mac is a tough sell. It's not the same product as Outlook Windows. It doesn't have the same features. And even calling it Outlook, moving from Entourage to calling it Outlook, I personally think was a mistake. It set up false expectations that we're always going to be frustrated. But all that, as a package, Office 2011 for the Mac was a big deal, and it brought a lot of improvements. It did, as Mark has pointed out, it also brought a lot of bugs. It brought a lot of incompatibilities and a lot of frustration, and I don't think that we've necessarily reached the end of the road for Mac Office. I think there's still room for improvement. I just don't know if it's going to improve fast enough to deal with the really rapid iteration and the really rapid feature improvements of cloud suites. I'm the parent of a 12-year-old. She has a Chromebook. She does literally every piece of homework she does in Google Apps. And by the way, don't tell anyone at Google that she's actually 12. But that's where she lives her computing life, is in Chrome. And she can do everything she needs to do. And we have not paid anyone for Microsoft Office for her. I don't know that we ever would. And so that's, between that and the tablet side of the equation, Office is getting squeezed really badly for small office, home office, and these folks. There's no justification for a lot of people to spend money on Office. So this is if this is Microsoft's way of saying it's still worth you spending money on Office, because now you're doing it in a way that makes sure, as to all those points, that you have the most current version and that you're going to be current. You're going to be doing it on a repeating basis and a subscription basis instead of paying all at once for a version that you'll just have to upgrade in a year. I think that's a good idea. I just don't know whether it's a long-term winning strategy.
Yeah,
so
I think
another problem that Microsoft has is that for a lot of professional and production workflows that use Office, like a lot of publishers for
Right.
book writing, you really can't go beyond Office 2004 on the Mac and still be compatible with the workflows. And that's something Microsoft simply can't overcome. But I'm sure it's something they're very aware of, and it's a huge problem.
Can you elaborate a little bit on that, Jeff, when you say you can't go beyond it? What kind of compatibility issues? File types, or what?
Well, to make sure you have the right features and that the macros that are needed to do whatever needs to be done to the chapter files works correctly, and to make sure that versioning is proper and compatible across platforms, and there's some other little things that end up getting mixed in there. These publishers, they end up with really specialized workflows, and once you move beyond the version of Word that they develop the workflows for, everything just breaks, or at least it breaks significantly enough that it's a big issue. And so there are a lot of people that need to continue to use Office 2004, and in some cases 2008. And when I've helped on book projects, I actually have a separate Mac that is my Office Mac, and then I can install Office 2004 or 2008, depending on what is acceptable for the workflow.
Mm-hmm.
And going to Office 2011 is completely out of the question.
Although
it won't work.
I do want to say that, speaking of features, Mac features in Office 2011, the reintroduction of Visual Basic back into the platform, that was a big
critical.
Feature. That's a big feature.
The other thing that came new in 2011 for Mac is, they got away with all the emulation layers in between. So instead of being, a very, very slow, sluggish program, it's picked up a hell of a lot of performance. So is that a feature? I don't know if that's a feature necessarily, but it certainly made it a lot better program suite to be using than the previous version.
So
but
what
I think,
hearing... I'm sorry, go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that, I think if we look how the world has evolved, I think the dependence on the Office suite, is no longer as essential as it was, maybe 5 or certainly a dozen years ago. I think that with the rise of the web, with the rise of all these different type of tablets, we've seen this, move down to sort of a least common denominator. I mean, you're all Mac guys. You can't look at any Mac blog without somebody hailing, discovering the virtues and benefits of plain text. So as a result, all these these other more advanced sophistication in the features are just people aren't using them. as one thing. And the other thing I found is literally in the past 18 months, documents have either been, common denominator has been rich text format or PDF. There really hasn't been any problems with Word. And then we've all, I'm sure, been on the problem of being on the receiving end of a Word document that has a virus and all sorts of problems with that. So I think at this point, I think Microsoft, it seems that their key strength is on Excel. The Word tools, the presentation tools, you can interoperate with native Mac tools, or third party, or just simpler forms of text.
So I guess what I'm hearing is that there are upgrades to Office that, if they are executed, could be valuable. That there may be reasons to go to the next version of Office, whatever that is, whether you choose 365 or whether you choose to buy the new one, or the new pay once install version. And frankly, it surprises me a little bit, Jeff's comments especially, about those particular features. My perception is that in the businesses where I work, I have to have Office, whether I like it or not, whether I want it or not, because there are still documents that are spit out of legacy systems. There are still people using old versions, and I have to be able to open those. And as good as Pages has become, it's still not perfect, and the path of least resistance is just to get a copy of Office.
So do you need the entire suite, or is it just Word?
Word and Excel, primarily, Mark. But I do have to say, and I admit I'm probably holding a little bit of a grudge here, but a couple months ago, I got, actually a little longer than that, I got the Retina machine that I'm talking to you on, and needed to install Office on it, and apparently that was my sixth machine, and for God love nor money, I could not get Microsoft to deactivate an old machine or an old copy and let me install it. And I tried Twitter, I tried email, I tried their website, I tried everything, and I finally had to capitulate because I was under the gun with some projects and just buy another copy, and it really bugged the daylights out of me. So when I hear that, oh yeah, you can install it on 5 machines and you can manage those activations, I'll watchfully wait and see. So that's my disclaimer.
Suspicious.
Yeah. Jeff, I'm a little surprised to learn some of the things you said, that if you're using CS3, that you're that far behind those people that are using CS6. Does the graphic world really change that much? And do these tools really change that much that fast?
For the average user, no, not at all. Unless you guys are working professionally as graphic designers, CS3 will do what you need and you're fine. But for professionals, if they're not using the current version, they have file compatibility issues, they will have feature compatibility issues, and that's a big thing, because in the graphic design world, you are not an island. Whatever it is that you're working on, part of it came from somewhere else, and you're handing it off to someone else when you're done. And so you need to make sure that everyone has compatibility. So you either have to get the entire graphic design world to freeze on a very specific version of Creative Suite, or everyone has to keep updating. And getting everyone to freeze is not going to happen. You will see people that will have setups that they do freeze, but that's not part of the regular workflow. That has some specialized thing that they do. And for the regular part of their workflow, for stuff that's coming in and then going back out, they're using the current Creative Suite.
Right.
But Jeff,
I was just going to say that you sometimes see certain sectors of the graphic design ecosystem lagging behind. And this was common in the Quark era, that there would be you'd see whole chunks of either advertising or magazines would stick on a particular version. It was very common with Quark groups using the Quark publishing system, because compatibility would lag behind with that. So everyone would stay on Quark 3 for an extra 6 months, and I think that's that's common Photoshop 5 and Photoshop 5.5 still very, very common, very prevalent in
Yes.
the market. But I think just this month or in the past 2 months, I've started to see, here's a CS6 file. We just had a CS6 After Effects project come in and had to put After Effects on a machine because we could not work on what was coming from this other studio unless we had the current version. So to Jeff's point, it doesn't happen all at once, but sooner or later there's something that pushes you and you can't interoperate unless you move forward.
So, Mike and Jeff, what do you think the sort of natural evolution is, given your experience? Is it 1 year, 2 years? How many? 3, 5, 2.79?
It's a cascading thing. It's happening all the time,
Yeah.
and part of it is something that Adobe's trying to make go away, which is the fact that having to upgrade to a new version of Creative Suite every time it comes out is an expensive thing.
Mm-hmm.
So what you had was this thing where people would skip a version, even though it was causing issues for them, and so you'd go from CS3 to CS5 or CS4 to CS6, and so you actually would end up with CS5, CS4, CS5, and CS6 files all bouncing around. And if you're the person that's still on CS4 and you have a file that comes in that uses features from CS5 that you don't have,
Problem.
now you're compelled to do something about it. And I think we'll see a lot of this transition between versions happening faster now, because a lot of these people will move to the subscription model. But for the people that don't want to move to that yet, and they want to stick, say, with CS5, and they have a project come in once a year or once a quarter that requires CS6, but they don't want to pay for it, then they can do subscription just for the month that they need. And that's a really slick way to work around having to do the upgrade to stay current. Just get current when you need it, and then fall back to your older version the rest of the time.
Well, and that's sorry, Chuck. You go ahead.
No, go ahead, Mike.
I was just going to say that's an excellent point that Jeff made in there about the versioning. Part of the artificial nature of boxed application versions is they have to be a big version number in order to get people to pay for them. If you're going to sell people a new version of Office or a new version of Creative Suite, there has to be enough mojo in it to make it worth spending $500 or whatever the sticker price is. But when you're in a subscription model, that goes away completely. People are always paying, so why not give them the new features when they're ready, or the new micro applications when they're ready, which is exactly what Adobe's doing. There's features in the digital publishing suite and Adobe Edge and other things that are only coming to CS6, as Jeff pointed out earlier, but they're not on a schedule where you have to wait until everything else is ready and we can put it all on the same DVD. Nobody knows what version of Google Apps they're using. Nobody knows what version of Outlook.com, what the underlying, or Salesforce, what the underlying version of that platform is, because they don't have to. They're simply always using the newest, and that's where this is moving to a point where you won't really care what the micro version is, because you will always be running the most current. And in fact, it starts to help Microsoft and Adobe move their customers to a software as a service model and get them used to the idea of paying for that service, paying for the capability, not paying for the particular version and the particular number on the box that says I bought something new, but simply paying for it on an ongoing basis.
Okay,
Right.
now here's the problem that comes up with that.
Oh, yeah.
And so the first problem, Adobe offering traditional license and subscription license.
Right, it's a transition.
Traditional license for Creative Suite 6 does not get the new features.
Mm-hmm.
So we already have compatibility issues, because there are some things you can do in Photoshop CS6 through the subscription model that I can't do on my Mac because I happen to have the traditional license. And so that's causing a problem right there. Another problem is that some of the plugins, third-party plugins that people are using, say in Photoshop or InDesign, are breaking with these micro updates that are coming out. So now we're having a problem where people are going in and disabling the auto update function for their CS6 subscription to freeze themselves at a version that doesn't break their plugins. And so the whole one of the big premises for end users is that you will always have the latest version, you don't have to worry about it, and everyone will have the same thing, has completely gone out the window, because if any group is going to completely screw up a business model for a software vendor, it will be the graphic design market, and that's exactly what's happening.
This edition of MacVoices is brought to you by Transporter, the solution to your cloud storage needs. Transporter provides you with a private cloud that you control, but that can be shared with anyone and accessed on any of your iDevices. One of the great things about Transporter is the cost. You know what you're going to pay when you buy, and know that you will have no monthly fees at any time. Share as much data as you like with as many people as you like at a known fixed cost. Your files are online and in the cloud quickly and easily. Just copy what you want to share, photos, documents, whatever, to your transporter, and they are immediately available to your iDevices or to anyone you choose to share them with. Get 10% off your transporter by visiting filetransporter.com/MV and use the code MacVoices. The transporter is available from all your favorite retailers, but you only get the 10% off if you buy from the website. Thanks to Transporter for sponsoring this edition of MacVoices. Jeff, that makes it a little scary, though, what you were saying about Office, that you could go back and install 2004, 2008 version. If you go to the cloud model with Adobe, you might be able to freeze your machine in one place, but as soon as you click that update button, you've lost the ability to downgrade or to go back.
Yeah. And this is part of the reason why I'm keeping an old Mac sitting in the closet, so that I don't have to worry about software compatibility for Office 2004. And that's kind of crazy to think I have an Office Mac sitting in the closet. I mean, that's the sole purpose of that machine. In a sense, it feels like I've gone back to the days of a typewriter or a word processor, where you have a dedicated machine just for making words.
Right, but I would suggest that over time, cases like that are going to become the minority. You know, that yes, there may be some feature problems, but you know, as companies get accustomed to making the switch from sort of a perpetual license where you buy it, to a time-based subscription, I think a lot of these problems are going to tend to go away. Where I think they're going to have bigger problems is with consumers. Where I mean, Mike was saying, for his daughter that they would never buy a Microsoft package. So the question is, at what rate is that? I mean, my eyes bled when I bought Office 2010 at the Stanford Apple store. I remember it was a damn painful, expensive purchase, but it was necessary, and as I said, it was so much faster and smoother. Much better than its predecessor. So these are valuable tools, but for companies, they're much better and able to justify it. Where I think they have a problem is if people are using it, and they have Word version 6 or something, and they just use it for writing Christmas card letters each year. I think that's going to be a hard sell. What? $100 for a new version, or you want me to pay $8 or $12 a month? I think for that there's going to be a lot of pushback, and ultimately Microsoft may need to capitulate and sell the professional suite into businesses, and they used to have, I haven't checked recently, they used to have sort of the light versions of Word. They used to have, what was it, Notepad and other things. So that sort of was the tool for the consumer buyer, and then they hope to upgrade them into to the Office suite. Early on, do you remember when the Office was not $300 or $400? It used to be a couple, 100, 150, 200. They've raised that price. Like Microsoft has raised the price of their OS, and then to compensate for the more price sensitive, they came out with home or student editions, and everyone's supposed to be doing it, but it's certainly here in Silicon Valley. You go to Fry's, you see people just picking up and buying it. Why? It's a lower price. It's the same good. It just comes in a different box. It has stern warnings that you need to be an accredited student or teacher in order to be able to buy this.
Yeah, but Microsoft didn't care because it got
right.
It got people using it. It locked them into their suite.
Exactly.
It was the gateway drug.
Yeah,
it's
like
drug.
in the old days. Adobe made it, and I'm sure no one will ever admit to this at Adobe, but they made it very easy to pirate Photoshop, and that's because it made it so easy to get it on everyone's computer, and then everyone's using it, and at some point, since these people are using it at work, many of them would end up buying the software. So
right.
Yeah, so it was a gateway drug.
But Jeff, are they making a mistake? And now I really am pointing the finger at Adobe. In the case of Photoshop, we have Elements, but that's really the only aspect of the Creative Suite, at least that I'm aware of, that has a low-cost alternative. Perhaps Premiere, to be fair about it. But
Sure.
Now, everybody wants to fancy themselves a pro, whether they are or not, and they want the Pro Tool just in case they ever need it. They're probably never going to use it. Just like everybody wants, a sports car that'll do 175, but nobody will ever drive it at 175. Are they making a mistake at the pricing, both for the packaged software and what they're trying to put out there with the cloud?
For the cloud, no. I think the cloud pricing is very compelling. Even if all you want is Photoshop, and you can get cloud pricing just for individual apps if you want. But for the whole package, the pricing I think is very compelling. For the traditional license, I've always thought it was ridiculously expensive. But on the other hand, the amount of resources that it takes to make applications that complex, I can't even imagine how big the cells are in the spreadsheet to describe that. It's just beyond comprehension how much money they have to spend to create Photoshop, and then throw in Illustrator and InDesign, and then Premiere and After Effects and everything else that they do. As going to the subscription model makes that a better proposition for Adobe, because they'll be bringing in more money overall. And I think that because they knew that people were doing the skip a version cycle for upgrading, well, they have to have the money each year anyhow. So how do you make that work? Well, the economics showed that if we do this much work and we make this, we have this number of clients or customers, and they're going to upgrade every other year. So we're staggering our updates. How do we make that money come in on a cycle that actually makes sense for us? Well, that's part of what sets the price. So on one hand, I think Adobe was charging too much, or is charging too much for the traditional license, and on the other hand, not. And as end users, we are a little bit responsible for that pricing as well, because we have made it clear to Adobe exactly how often we're willing to upgrade and pay all that money.
Jeff, at that price, I guess you make an excellent point about the development costs, and if I take you as the expert that you are, then I will assume that it is correct that all these new features are coming out that need to be addressed. One thing, though, that I hear from a lot of people when we get into this discussions of these upgrades and all, is the fact that for many of us, now this is not you, this is the other three guys here and everybody else watching, a lot of those features we don't need, we don't access, we don't use. And it's frustrating to me right now when I get something that's been created with CS5, somebody sends it over, and I can't open it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's nothing fancy, it's nothing exciting. But if I tell them, oh, I have an older version, they save it backwards compatible, and now all of a sudden I can open it. And I don't know, this call it paranoid, but is this just a forcing me to try to upgrade for convenience, or are there really things that by downgrading they're saving it that now I can't edit or do in my older version?
Well, it wouldn't surprise me if there's a little bit of, well, if we make it so that these two versions don't work well together, then the person with the older version is more likely to upgrade. But the reality is that that when Adobe releases, we'll use Photoshop as an example. When Adobe releases a new version of Photoshop, there will be features that are in the new version that simply don't translate back to an older version. Like maybe they'll do some sort of new filter or something like that. And it will remain editable in the current version of Photoshop. But if you want to give the file to someone that has an older version, since their version simply cannot process whatever it was that was done in the newer version, whatever that effect was now gets rastered back in as an uneditable object in the file. And there's really no way around that other than making sure that everyone has the most up-to-date version of the software. And so one other thing I wanted to hit on the Photoshop thing. Photoshop is an amazingly popular application because everyone wants to edit their images. And Photoshop is not the right tool for 90% of the people on the market, just across the board. And that's why Adobe made Photoshop Elements, so that we would have the version that we needed. But they were smart when they did it because it has compatibility with the regular version of Photoshop. It's actually the exact same file format. You can create a Photoshop file and open it in Elements, or go the other way too. So I'm glad they did that. That was really smart. And probably saved them a lot of pirating, because instead of having to spend $500 on an app, you can go out and spend $80 and have all the features that pretty much everyone on the planet needs.
Right. So I'd like to build on a point Jeff made, which is that it's a head and tail of related points. One is that new features do require new databases, new metadata. So for that, unfortunately, you have time's arrow. Things move forward, and it's very difficult to go back. And the other related point is that may be a business strategy to try to force or motivate or compel people to upgrade. But I think more often than not, that's not the case. It's that these are new features. It requires different database structures. And they're trusting that over time people will want to upgrade. They will go through this. Oh, I'm only on version 5.5. Could you downgrade it and send it to me again? That can happen only so many times, I guess, before there's enough social pressure for people to upgrade. So that's the sort of the dynamic nature of the market. And again, I still really think there's a very fascinating difference that. I think for most of the Microsoft Office suite, except maybe as Mike Rose was saying that PowerPoint may have some layering and motion features that are still continuing to evolve. I've bought many versions both on Mac and a couple on Mac and many on Windows of the Office suite, and it just really fundamentally doesn't seem to change very, very much. Whereas, in Adobe's case, the creative apps, are continuing to enhance. But as we were saying earlier in the discussion, it seems like their rate of innovation is starting to slow. And if people don't value what's in it and they don't buy, that's a real challenge for the manufacturer. So they could try, like Microsoft has done, boost the price by doubling the price of the OS, which they did in the late 90s into the early 2000s, increasing the price of the Office suite, which they did after they achieved dominance and knocked off, all the other, suite vendors out there. But they can only do that so long, right? Because of price elasticity, they'll sell many more copies at a lower price. Voila, that's the idea, one of the motivating factors behind a subscription. But again, I think one of the key differences is that for creatives, they can really clearly see the benefit of they get new capabilities. I think that Excel and Word are so over improved, most users don't see the value. and there it's going to be just a balancing and optimization act of, is this worth $8 a month for a home user, or $15 a month for a small business, or $20 a month for an enterprise? I think in preparing for this jury deliberations, I went and looked at the pricing for the Office suite, Office 365, on Microsoft's site, and clearly they're offering same tools, completely different price points, for different customers. So I think that I think is just really bad marketing. But I don't know what Microsoft is going to do around it, because they're going to try to optimize and get as much money out of the Fortune 100 as they can, and they'll have a lower price to try to hit the Fortune 5 million, the companies that have 100 or fewer employees.
To be fair, Microsoft has always been really, really sucky at figuring out their marketing. I mean, like a giant bucket of suck.
I'm glad you were being fair, Jeff.
And,
I would hate to hear unfair Jeff on this topic.
Yeah, well, I'm never unfair.
That's true. That's true. There's no such person as unfair Jeff.
See, okay, so look at Windows.
Yes.
And look at how many versions of Windows there are, and how do you pick the right one?
Well, you take the name of the street you grew up on and combine it with the name of your first
No. That's a porn star name.
Premium, and add premium. Oh no, sorry. Add premium professional
plus. Yeah.
That's right.
Right. And
that's how you know what version of Windows you need.
And actually, I think that's the best formula I've ever heard for how Microsoft divvies up Windows. It totally fits. And so if you have something that is so complex and has so many versions that you can't even get a matrix set up for people to be able to figure out what it is they need to buy, that's not conducive to selling your product.
Exactly. But again, for much of Microsoft history, so much of its revenue comes not from end users, but through PC manufacturing partners and other partners, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And in that game, it's like retail, right? You want as many SKUs as you can, so everyone will buy, and no one can do an exact A to B comparison and complain that, well, you're charging me $2 more than this other guy.
And that just creates successful.
Yeah. And it makes unfortunately the cost of that approach is it makes it hell for the end user who's trying to figure out, gee, which version of Windows 8 should I get?
Right, which ultimately becomes a good selling point for competing products. And since we're Mac users, I'll toss that out. How many versions of OS X are there? Well, there's one. But if you want it to be server, there's an add-on module that you can.
It's an app. Yeah, I mean, as far as users are concerned, it's an app. I mean, that's the thing that's interesting, is that I don't think we would, as consumers, we would never really think about buying an operating system on layaway. We wouldn't subscribe. We wouldn't necessarily subscribe to an operating system. Although, truthfully, that's what you do when you buy an iOS device, or specifically when you buy an iPhone. I mean, you're paying a subscription fee and you're getting the OS updates as a bonus.
Sure.
But the idea of, well, I'm going to pay, $30 a month for the privilege of using my OS. No, I would never do that. But in the software as a service world, that's exactly what you do. Your core applications, everything that you run your business on, or everything that you run your professional life on, you pay a monthly service fee for it. So right. It's not that foreign to a lot of customers to work this way. It's just that we haven't really thought about boxed software working this way before, and that's where I think some, particularly as we keep coming around to, on the Adobe side, it's a good deal and it makes sense. On the Microsoft side, it may end up being a good deal, but there's some question as to the real utility of it and how much do people need Office in that way. as you're being fair, you're continuing to be fair on that topic. We appreciate
There you go.
Mikey,
But I think Jeff raises really interesting points, which is if you think about it, as a marketer at a company, you really want to make it easy for people to buy, and you want to remove all sorts of pieces of friction. And one gigantic one is, if you have 4 different versions and it's not really clear and they're sort of overlapping, that is a recipe for non-adoption. And if you look at the numbers for Microsoft Windows 8, it seems like maybe they're cooking their books and they're saying 20 million a month, because none of the other corroborating stats in terms of web browser version number, strings, etc., seem to be able to justify that. So that's a real challenge that that company has, which is how to simplify it, to accelerate their adoption. But that's also I think Mike's point was that kind of people are now thinking differently about a subscription basis, because that's a brand new concept. This whole software as a service, rental, etc. People before, you say, okay, well, how often do you, if you were to ask them, well, how much do you pay per month for Office? Well, what do you mean I don't pay per month? He said, well,
right.
How much was the last time you bought it? Oh, it was $230. Well, how long ago was it? Oh, it was about about 2.5 years. Well, you do the math and you get to this number. So that's a foreign concept, and Microsoft, if I were there, I'd be educating people. Look, you know it or not, you are buying. You do pay a certain amount per month, and you're in this range depending on how many. Are you at a company, or are you using a home use, or are you a casual user, or a power user, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That we're continuing to invest and improve it. I think that would be a positive message. Instead, as I agree with Jeff, and I'm being fair now, they kind of stepped on their foot, for certainly for all the Mac users, that they're taking away the option for a 3-pack for teachers and home. Guaranteed, you want to get somebody upset and angry, take something away from them. Completely self-inflicted wound. They should have come out and offered a different version. And we're doing this, and it has a lower price, and that would draw people's attention. But they didn't do it.
But Mark, the one difference there is, as a purchaser of software, I can kind of control to some degree my cost.
Yes.
Because I can decide whether I have to upgrade or not. I can use it as much or as little as I want to, not have to make that cost-benefit analysis every month or every couple months. And I decide, okay, I'm going to run this software 2 years longer than really they would want me to, because I don't need the new features. So whereas Microsoft might say, okay, your cost is going to be $10 a month, I might be able to turn mine to $5 a month by running it twice as long. And here, you don't have that. Now it's, if you want access to this, regardless of whether you want the old version, new features, old features, whatever, this is what you're going to have to shell out.
So another thing I did in prep for this MacJury is, just before we came on, I went to eBay and did a quick search. There's a fair decent volume of CDs for Office 2010. Anywhere from like $30 to $50. And that's for the Office suite. So I think there are all sorts of ways if people want to lower their costs, they can do that. Or in Jeff's case, gee, I should have saved that. I don't have it. I'm stuck. Let me go buy a copy, and for $30 or $50, you can get downrev version of the Office suite. Again, these for Microsoft, the challenge is that these are all things that people will look at if they feel that they've been wronged and they're upset. I think, again, going back to a point I made earlier, that I think in many areas that maybe in business outside of, again, the dominance of Excel, that people are seeing there's other choices out there. And I think the downside is that once people realize that the protection racket, the mob doesn't come by and kill you, you can still get your work done if you don't have an Office suite. I think once people learn that, that's doom for Microsoft.
And I'll just put back Mark, the same thing I think that you said earlier, which is and Jeff certainly said, is that it is the collaborative efforts and things you work on with other people that drive you to buy into the dominant Office suite and to the dominant tools. If you work on an island, if you are the president of Desert Island Incorporated, then you're great, and you don't need you can do all your documents on coconut husks and everything's great. At the moment you start to interact with other people's content, that's when that fidelity matters. And I mean, keeping in mind, as Mac users, we already have this problem just going from the latest Windows version of Office to the latest Mac version of Office. If you say I can get by with Pages, or I can get by with Google Docs, or I can get by with OpenOffice or whatever, you're sacrificing some of that interoperability. And for many people it's fine, for some people it's not. They have to make that choice based on what their collaborators expect and how much fidelity they need. I already gave the example of one kind of person who's working primarily on her own stuff and doesn't need a high degree of interoperability, which would be my kid, all the way to Jeff or myself, where we need interoperability to the point where there are situations where I'll run Office Windows in parallels because I need to be able to see exactly what the person on the other end of the conversation is seeing. And that there's no way to negotiate out of that situation unless Mark disappears. Speaking of interoperability, there's no way to negotiate yourself out of that situation. There are times when you have to buy into what the dominant Office paradigm is, or the dominant the dominant graphic arts paradigm is. There's no way around it.
Yeah, there are certain times where you have to jump off the bridge just like the other kids.
Guys, we've been at this for a while. We're running out of time for deliberations, and as always, I really appreciate your wisdom and your opinions. Go around the table, quick answer on one last question. And sort of alluding to what Mike said, software as a service is not new. This is the first time we've probably seen it with box software making a transition over, but we've all used things like Basecamp, Salesforce, a dozen others that started as software as a service, so you really didn't think about it. Is this the future? Is this where we're going with the majority of software? Mark, you were last introduced, so how about if I give you the first answer?
That's a fascinating question. I suppose where I check in on it is for software that's mature and use is widespread, I think things are going to go into some sort of time-based subscription model. For all the reasons we were discussing before, you get problems if people don't upgrade and they have the problems of too many versions out in the field, etc. But on the other hand, for brand new cutting-edge software, I think that there's still a lot of margin to be had by selling that to advanced users first, and then as the market matures, if it gets to that point, then that may make that transition. So I think we're going to see sort of a polarization in terms of how software is sold, driven very much by the nature of the market. Is it young, dynamic, or is it mature? And also, some of the nature of infrastructure. Things like Salesforce, etc. It's much easier to tap into that centralized server resource instead of having to manage it and deploy it and provision it your company. So I think we'll see both models, but for certainly the two that this jury was convened to discuss, I think that a couple years after this transition works its way out, people are going to be buying and subscribing at on a time basis.
Mike?
Well, I think it's interesting that we're seeing we're still in the first 4 years of the App Store as a common term. The iOS App Store, the Google Play, Amazon's App Store, and the Mac App Store, and now Windows 8 App Store as well, where the idea that people can and do buy software easily online as a given component of the operating system that lets you do this, that's still very new. Even though it goes beyond shareware, it goes beyond downloadable apps. This is a very new idea for a tremendous number of consumers, particularly people on mobile devices. It's for all that you could and did use Fandango and install apps on Palm or BlackBerry, the majority of the market hadn't seen this before. So to have app stores on the one hand and the software as a service subscription model on the other, I think both of those threads are going to continue. I think it's going to be really interesting to see where they start to overlap and blend, and where you do have subscription models for what is traditionally desktop software, because those companies, as Mark said, that they're mature companies, mature offerings, they're looking for a more consistent source of revenue, and certainly Apple and Google's cut doesn't make it any easier to make their money on the App Store. So subscriptions is a good way to go.
Jeff, did you get the last word from the jury box?
Go me. All right. Mike, I really liked what you were saying about we have the two models, the App Store and the subscription thing. I think we will see a coexistence of traditional pay for the app and you're done, and subscription. And where I think we'll see more of the subscription is more the professional end, like Creative Suite, and clearly Microsoft is going that way, even for consumers. And so I think we will have a blending of the two for quite a while. Although with Creative Suite, I am certain within 3 years, the only way you will be able to get Creative Suite is as a subscription.
Here, agree.
These three gentlemen are a lot smarter than I am. I guess my take is on it that there's a lot of appeal to being able to subscribe for a while to something as powerful as the Creative Suite. Use it only when I need to as a non-graphics professional, and then flip it back off instead of having to invest all that money, worry about the upgrades and all. I think there's some software that is better purchased. It's going to make more sense. Or you're going to have to incent the users by giving them a better price for a longer-term commitment instead of just a month-to-month. The month-to-month will work great for some things. I think for some others, and it may be one thing that Microsoft is doing smart over a year instead of making me decide to pay it every month to make me pay it for a year. So I don't know. It's interesting developments, and we're going to continue to watch them and maybe reconvene this jury in a year and see what happens. Gentlemen, again, thank you so much for your time. Jeff Gamet, Mark Fuccio, Mike Rose, really appreciate it. We'll see you again back here on the MacJury.
Cool.
Thank you all.
Thanks for having me on.
Folks, please visit the MacVoices website. We'll have links in the show notes to everything that our guests and panelists do so that you can see them when they're not here. Until the next time, I'm Chuck Joyner, and the verdict is in. Thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for links, show notes, to subscribe, to connect with Chuck on Twitter, app.net, Google+, Facebook, and for more Apple, Mac, and tech-related shows, including MacVoices, Mac Notables, the MacJury, and the MacVoices Briefing. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com.